you've each touched on capitalism, and we are feeling and experiencing the effects, and I think that's on purpose. And I feel like to some degree there's an intention to make people feel overwhelmed. And it's not just with the fierceness of the injustice or the discrimination that we are seeing and experiencing in many ways, whether it's social, economic, ethnic. My question is this, though: when you feel overwhelmed, who do you turn to, or what keeps you going? Where do you find your energy to keep doing the work that you do?
I was initially a little reluctant because I am the eldest in the group, and I thought I might learn something from the two of you about how you address situations that are bound to emerge, where we feel exhausted and we feel as if we're running on a treadmill, that we're doing all of this work, but we don't necessarily see the fruits of our organizing work. So I have a two-part answer to that. The first one is based on a sense of our historical positioning and how we relate both to the past and to the future. I think it's always really important to remind ourselves that we are where we are today only because of people who have struggled before us. They created the conditions for new arenas of struggle. And our role is to do the same. We're not necessarily, regardless of how old we may be at this moment, we're not going to see the ultimate consequences of the organizing that we do within our lifetimes. But if we think about the fact that we would not be where we are today in this country if not for the struggles of indigenous people who challenged colonialism from the very outset, the struggles of slaves who had perhaps the most compelling collective imagination of what it might mean to be free. I always, think about Nina Simone's song, I wish I would know how it feels to be free. So I think it's always important to remember that as we are involved in struggles today against, as Davíd was pointing out, the central civil and human rights struggles of our time are struggles to defend the rights of immigrants, not only here in North America, but all over the world. Those of us who are involved in work to abolish prisons, we recognize that immigrant detention facilities are an extremely important sector of the prison industrial complex. As a matter of fact, when it comes to the privatization of imprisonment, the most profitable sector is immigrant detention, constituted by immigrant detention facilities. So that, I think it's important to recognize that the work that we are doing today is going to create new arenas of struggle for those who come after us. The second part of the question has to do with how we help ourselves as we do the work. And there's been a lot of discussion around self-care. And people tend to imagine self-care as individual. So we have to figure out how to take care of ourselves so that we can come back to the struggle. When I was in jail, yoga became a very important part of my life because I could use yoga and meditation to address all of the stress and the difficulties that inevitably emerge when one is held under those kinds of conditions. And I think that's important. I mean, I still practice, well, just before I came to this call, I did a yoga class by Zoom. And I do that almost every day. You know, I do a yoga or a Pilates class, and then I take a long walk.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, but it needs to be more collectively focused. Our movements have to acquire a sense of what it means to attend to the emotional needs of our comrades. You know, it used to be that nobody really cared how you felt. What was most important was what you contributed to the movement, and you had to kind of, you know, check all of your traumas and, you know, all of your other difficulties at the door and become the activist. But I think we've reached a point where we recognize that movements are created by human beings, and we all come with our baggage. We all come with our traumas and inherited traumas, and we have to figure out how to address that collectively, not just individually. And so I think that Audre Lorde talked about radical self-care. And I think that we need to also talk about radical care of the collective self as well.
I really resonate with what you're talking about. I came down with a very severe autoimmune illness a couple of years ago, and that's totally changed how I operate as an individual, but it's also really brought me so much closer to why I feel compelled to work with soil and growing plants, because an ecosystem is a system, it's a community. None of that is, there's no individual in nature. And so I really resonate with what you're talking about, Angela, and I have also been so inspired by discovering Audre Lorde's writings recently through Adrienne Brown, who does so much good work to affirm care in action.
Leah, I should tell you that also after I finished my yoga class this morning and before I came on the call, I went out to see how my garden was doing. I looked at the kale that's about this high right now, and the tomatoes that are actually kind of going wild. And,
oh, great! Thank you. I love that.
So that's also been a really important part of my self-care practice. Working with the soil, and I learned how to do this while I was teaching in the San Francisco County Jail, because we had a program that taught people in prison how to do organic gardening.
Wow.
And so I've been doing that since the 80s.
I would like to lift up Leah Penniman and Soulfire Farm. They're in the Albany, New York area, and their mission is to uproot racism in the food system. Mm-hmm. And they do a lot of work of generational healing through connection with the land.
Davíd, are you gardening these days?
Not too much. I want to, not too much. But it's something that we think about a lot here. And I live in a very urban setting in San Diego, Southeast San Diego, and it's part of the conversations around my collective. I'm part of Colectivo Zapatista, and we're constantly thinking about how to bring or shift to a more autonomous way of living and break free from the matrix, right? What I call the matrix or capitalism, and just unplug and urban farming and gardening, is definitely something that we learned about with the students in Puerto Rico that they're doing, right? In Puerto Rico and agriculture, and incredible work that's happening to resist colonialism in Puerto Rico, and so many lessons to be learned, and I'm sure from your work as well. On the, the question that you posed, Jose, on this idea of hopelessness and that sometimes we are overcome with, it's funny because as a teacher, sometimes I talk to my students about everything that's happening around the world in our country, and they're like, dang, Mr. Morales, like, we just talk about sad stuff, like, like and I tell them, look, it's true, but like, it's really important to know what's going on, and and they start feeling hopelessness, right? And we have conversations about it, and I try to inspire them, and I tell them, look, like that's exactly how the system wants you to feel, right? That's exactly how these people in power want you to feel, like nothing can be done. And I think the first step is to believe that we can affect change, right? Because when we don't believe that, like, that's it, we've already lost. Like, there's nowhere else to go. So we have to be able to believe and seek the inspiration. And talking about intergenerational struggles, right? Like, I really resonated with what you were talking about, Angela. To me, where I find my inspiration is with my mentors. I feel so fortunate, so extremely fortunate and privileged and lucky to have been guided by great mentors in my life. My own high school teacher, who was the first person to teach me to be proud of who I am, to pronounce my name Davíd and not David, right? To teach me about actually the beautiful struggles of my people throughout Latin America, and to be proud of the person I am. And then in college, I was mentored by Cecilia Ovilla, who actually was the one who introduced me to the Rosenberg Fund for Children. And she, incredible woman who managed to escape Chile during the Pinochet dictatorship, and who has been a lifelong educator. And I just feel so lucky. And that's who when I feel hopelessness and when I feel lost, I turn to my mentors for inspiration and to see what they have, the work they have done and what they have lived, and to see that how far they have come, and the potential work and impact that I can have on those who are younger and who are going to come after me, right? But